Today we're going to learn about the word did. D-I-D. Did. So the first part we have our D. So we can make our circle and our line down. Or again, you can do line down and then the circle. D. I. Start at the dotted line, go down, and give it a dot. D-I-D. And then again, we're going to trace. D-I-D. Good, and the last time. D-I-D. Did. Did. Okay, this is stamp it. If we were in class, we would take stamping letters and stamp it. However, we do not have those. So what you can do is you can write them with crayon or colored pencil or marker. You can make it pretty, whatever you'd like to do. There's my did. D-I-D. Okay, and then it says rainbow, write it. That means that you can use, again, whatever colors you want to use. So I like to do D, and then I'm going to do red, I, and green, D. D-I-D. Then it says use it in a sentence. This can be anything. I like the sentence I, capital I, because anytime we use the word I, it's capitalized. And then did, D, I, D, it, I, T. And then I'm going to give it an exclamation mark because I did it. I'm very excited that I did it. So I'm going to write the sentence, I did it. And then I gave an exclamation mark. You can write this sentence too, or you can write your own. If you are not done writing it, you can pause the screen and finish. If you don't use all of the line, that's okay. It's just if you have a longer sentence, you could add that. Okay. On the back, we are going to continue to work with the word did, D-I-D. Again, we're going to trace, line down, and then the circle, I, D. You could also do the circle, then the line, did, D, I, D, did. D, I, D, did. D, I, D, did. And now I'm going to write them. D, I, D, did. D, I, D, did. D, I, D, did. I don't want to crowd them. I have my finger space in between them. Did. D, I, D, did. Okay, now down here, I can do two things. I can cut these out and glue them on here, or I can just write them in. I'm going to write them in. D, the D is capitalized, and you'll notice that down here as well. There is a capital D and there's a lowercase d. The capital D goes first because it is the beginning of the sentence. D, I, D. Did you see that croc? Another name for a crocodile is a croc. Okay, then down here with the lines, one letter on each line. D, I, D. Again, I capitalized that first D because it's the beginning of the sentence. Did you see that croc? And here is the question mark. The question mark is there because they're asking the question. Did you see it? Okay, now we're going to write this sentence. We're not writing our own sentence. We're going to write this sentence. So I'm just going to copy D, I, D, did, space, U, Y, O, U, there's you, C, S, E, E, that, croc. So there's my sentence. If you go over and you need more space, this line down here is for that. And then I'm going to give it a question mark because just like up here, it's a question. So, did you see that croc? Okay. When you are done, please take your paper to an adult and read them that sentence. Great job. Kiss your brain.